Hello. How are you
Hi.
doing?
Oh, there you
All
have
good?
Ting.
Ah, Shantin's coming. He came. That's good. Well, I wanted
Well,
to wish you a happy
he,
Mother's Day in public.
thank you.
Hope you
Yeah,
had a blast yesterday.
yeah,
Last yesterday. Yeah, that sounds good.
yeah.
Hello,
It was
Shantin.
good.
I thought you weren't coming. It's good that you came.
But you still did the countdown just in case. So.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi. How are
Hi.
you?
I just put on my headphones. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I put the countdown in your name because the title was your idea. So,
Oh,
the,
my honor. I
yeah,
really like KFC. Sorry about
no, no. Well,
that.
yeah, I thought that we could start by that. Like, where did that title came from?
Can we have a KFC themed timer?
Well, probably when I'm done grading papers,
We should we should
possibly. Yeah, we
we should
can.
ask for sponsorship from KFC.
You will be the happiest composer alive.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, let's start. Yeah.
We already began.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about the title of today's stream? It was your idea.
Yeah. What did I write?
She can type which side, left or right. What does
Okay.
that mean?
I don't know. I mean, for me, because I'm not native speaker, so when I first heard side, I was very confused
Uh,
because I could only think of left or right. That's my intuition. But maybe for you guys or native speaker, maybe you can quickly
I'm not.
think
I'm
about
not
the
a
third.
native speaker.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, I speak Spanish.
and then recently I read a joke about a similar joke when a mom or tried to order KFC and then they and then the cashier asked her which side and then the mom said left, something like that, and oh yeah, but
Is this
that's
from an ad that you're talking about?
yeah,
Okay.
and
Huh.
then so I guess for some people the intuition may be a little bit different, and left or right
Mhm.
here can be referred to our brain. I just
Yeah.
realized we have already gone live. Oh, sorry about
Yeah.
KFC. I should reserve it
No. I
for
think
later.
that this is
Yeah,
gold. This is gold. I
but
think.
left
Yeah.
or right when it's re- when we are talking about our brain, usually people believe that the right brain is more about our creativity, our emotion, and then the left side
It's the
will
logical side,
is
right?
more logical. Yeah. So
Yeah.
somehow I believe it's. Of course, the joke was not related to our podcast, our theme, but somehow it's remotely related to what we are talking about. Yeah, you because you said we are talking about like intention and intuition. So it
Yes,
is.
I agree.
I believe this is also a battle between our left and right brain. Yeah.
Well, it's difficult, I think, especially composers in like any kind of academic setting. Like, I think the general public would say like composers should be creative, like emotionally expressive people. But then the academia, I feel like kind of pushes the opposite, that we should have this like structure and like brilliance.
Oh, I think you have some thoughts. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Please
Yeah.
continue. I didn't mean to
No, I mean,
interrupt.
I think that like it's that I think so. I mean, maybe there's a merge of the two, but a lot of times it's like a lot of times when I've heard discussions about intuition versus like conscious association, so like intuition is generally referred to, I think, as it's a choice that we would make without overly thinking. So we're based on our life experience and our musical training, like and our preferences. That um, it just comes very um, intuitively to us. So like yeah, and then whereas consciousness, I think decisions are more refer to decisions like when people are mapping out big forms, manipulating their materials, making, any kind of mathematical process, any kind of process they're applying. And a lot of times I feel like in the academia, they're presented as like polar opposites. And maybe it is for some people, but it's not for me. I feel like they kind of flow between each other. But I would also say that I'm not 100% an intuitive composer, but I'm probably more intuitive than process-based. I don't know. I could be wrong, but the feeling I get is that that Shangting is probably the most intuitive. I'm kind of
I think so.
In the middle, but maybe leaning towards intuitive. And I feel like you seem to have more processes, like more like thought out processes built out.
Could be.
Then the two of us. I don't know. I don't think you're like, I don't think you're hot, but just based off the three of us, it seemed like when you presented your drafts and stuff that you did a lot with like, thought out with like form and structure and
Okay. I'm guilty. I can accept that. So are you?
No, it's not a bad thing. It's just how it works. And I think for me, when I was younger, when I was like in probably in undergrad and probably my first year of my grad school, I would say my work was almost 100% intuitive. There wasn't a lot of process, and I started writing the same pieces over and over again after a while. I think particularly, I think I just have really specific preferences that are not that varied. And so like sometimes I actually find in my music that I actually have to pull, I actually favor sounds in my music. I think now that I actually, if I were to tell you like, do I enjoy that sound? No, I don't. But I kind of like working with the sounds that kind of provide me that discomfort and like picking them apart. I find a lot of interest in it. But oftentimes I'm probably dealing with sound material that in the rawest form, it's not, my favorite sound. And I'm manipulating them like that. And a lot of times I kind of write material. I usually have a lot of times restraints on my material that are kind of more conscious. And then I write the material more intuitively. And then I edit it more conscious. And then sometimes my forms work intuitively and sometimes they work consciously. But my forms are not very complicated. My forms are pretty basic, I would say. And pretty much all my pieces.
Mm-hmm. So, well, okay, that's how you will describe your music.
Yeah.
Do you think that people will perceive them like that? Because when I think of your music, I see like this very complex stuff going on. And I think that most people wouldn't consider you as a very intuitive composer in the end.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would consider myself much more on the intuitive side, for sure. I would definitely consider me much more on the intuitive side. I think the thing where conscious comes the most into play is when I'm editing material, and then sometimes when I'm arranging it and actually putting it into forms. Because if I let my intuition do the form, I'm pretty much always going to get an A section to a B section and a very slow and very linear transition, like very sudden changes, abrupt changes. I think they have a place in my music too, but they're not. My intuition doesn't. My intuition likes really gradual things. My intuition doesn't like transients, which is funny because I think my music is full of really harsh transients. And I a lot of times I put them in there because it's like I really have a hard time with transients. I wonder, like, if it's because of my experience as a horn player, where articulation, there's a lot of variety of articulation, but it's really hard to articulate clearly. And even if you if you were actually to tune into like the horn section of the top professional orchestra, they would sound great, but you would notice little errors in their articulation and little fuzziness. And I think I get overly sensitive to it. So like intuitively, everything would go from nothing and gradually come in and go away from nothing. And so when I don't do that, I make really strong transients. Because that's maybe that's intuitive for me. I either have to do something not at all or just like really, really do it. Mezzo is not, in my wheelhouse too much. Mezzo of any musical property. But yeah, but it kind of flows in because at a certain point, like you're making conscious decisions.
I think that it works for your music, because if not, your music is at a first glance really hard to grasp. So if you don't have those smooth transitions, those smooth transitions, it's like you also have these complex forms. You also have this complex texture. So you have a complex foreground and a complex background.
I would say like my forms are really simple, and actually
that's what I mean.
My textures are complicated, and my timbres sometimes aesthetically is really complicated, but like the forms are really simple. And I actually get a lot of composers, like professional composers, when I would present music at master classes, that would always comment on that. And some would comment on a positive attribute because they think that the simpler forms helped the material, which was less simple to grasp, be easier to grasp. But other people just kind of took it to be like, oh wow, you really suck at form. So I don't know. It just depended on the person. But I tend to think that complicated form. Mm-hmm. If I were to explore complicated form, I feel like I would really, really have to change the types of material I like to use.
I would think so too, because you will create an imbalance there. That's what I was trying.
But yeah, at a certain point, like, your intuition is always changing too. And like, as you do things more and more, eventually like the conscious gets, for me at least, gets soaked into my intuition. And my intuition kind of evolves as I age. And my intuition, like, I mean, today would be very, very different than my intuition would be like when I was a little kid writing little songs on the piano.
I have to say something about that, but Chuntin, would you like to say something?
I think very interesting when you mentioned about your training as a horn player, because I played the piano and I actually don't like. I mean, I didn't like writing for the piano.
Yeah, I don't like writing for the horn either, so it's kind of funny.
And I prefer a very I prefer gradual sound. I prefer slow crescendo. I prefer subtle changes in tone colors.
So it's the dynamic limitations that are what's hard for you about the piano?
And at least on the piano, you can't have you can't change the sound of a note.
Yeah.
After you have played it. I mean, for maybe for very accomplished pianists, maybe they could draw a variety of tone color from the instruments, but basically it's very hard to locate this kind of things, and not everybody can do that. If you are looking for some obvious changes, like like what you can do with the string, with the woodwind, with the brass edge, then that's impossible on the piano, basically.
I think
And
that
Yeah.
you can do
I
that,
mean,
but if you go inside the piano, but I don't think I've
yes and
ever
no.
seen. Yes and no,
But
you
even
have more
if
experience with that.
I mean, even if you think about inside the piano, like it might change the timbre, but it doesn't really change. Most techniques don't change the attack
Okay.
that much of the piano, or the way that the sound decays. The only exceptions I can think, oh, I know I can think of two exceptions. It would be like scratching like the coils of the low strings would
Mhm.
be different, or like trying to bow a piano string. Um,
as
Whereas most other things, like, if you put like paper or a coin on the string, it's going to have a very different timbre, but the articulation and the way the sound decays is not extremely different anyway.
and also, I mean, I I I don't know how the elementary composers are trained in the United States, but when I was like a first year or second year student, um, I I always fear that prepared pianos was not welcome, because we need to put things inside the piano. We may
Mhm.
have to require the pianist to do something that they may find silly, and at the same time, because I play the piano, so I try to avoid what I dislike on the piano. So I try to practice how to write music that requires a lot of subtle changes. I re- I
Mhm.
s- develop a taste for nuances, and then gradually I find it harder and harder to write for the piano, because in my head, when I imagine various sounds for my pieces, I just couldn't like how the limited possibilities on the piano, unless I can prepare it. I can do something inside. Um, but at the same
Yeah.
time, as mentioned, I fear that this kind of preparation was not welcomed. And
Do you have a Do you have a favorite instrument to write for then?
um,
Strings,
Or a,
right?
I used to
or a
like
favorite group?
viola. I used to like
Strings,
Okay.
viola. Yeah,
yeah.
and lot
Yeah.
lot too low, lot too high, and yeah, and it has a very mellow sound to me, at
Yeah.
least. Yeah,
I
I
can see
like
that
it.
that timbre really working well for your music.
I'm very unhappy when the internet starts to have a trend to make fun of viola, because back then I had a very good
Oh,
friend who was also a viola, who also plays viola. So I like viola, if you let
Yeah.
me choose. But
that's really like 19th century thinking. I would say personally, like making
um,
fun of the viola. Yeah, when you have
Oh
that
yeah.
type of repertoire, like in the
Yeah.
19th century common practice period, but in the 20th century, I always go back to Bartok. But yeah, he's got a viola concerto, for
Yeah.
example. Like,
and I think sometimes our training may make us to stay away from our intuition, maybe, or and then as as
Mhm.
oh, that's interesting.
as what
Training versus intuition.
just like I don't prefer to write for the piano. I want to do something that the piano is unable to do, or something that is hard for the piano.
So
um
you're kind of mashing together, putting together the piano with a more formal way of thinking, with more intentionality, with a more
Mhm.
conservatory type of training, right?
and and I mean, our intuition changes too, because we get a education, we study things, we analyze pieces. Then I would say it's like you build up your vocabularies, you can say things a little bit differently. And I believe composition training or education is more or less like this. When you know how to write or how to think about music differently, then somehow our intuition is also changed.
Hmm.
And you may say, um, if we always rely on intuition, in my opinion, it's like we rely on our memory when we try to tell a story. Maybe for example, you want to write, let's say a story about a crime. Then you don't do your research, you rely on your memory, and then you write about that particular crime, particular case, and you find that actually it is not the same thing. And then when you get a little bit more educated, you read more news, maybe you write then maybe you will write a little bit differently about that particular case. I think music composition is similar on this regard. Maybe after you listen to Tchaikovsky for 10 years, and you need to listen to Tchaikovsky daily, 5 hours a day, maybe you will write completely differently. You don't know. Maybe you just write like Tchaikovsky after 10 years of training. But yeah, because by doing this, our memory is shaped,
Hmm.
and our former memory about older stuff or our initial musical upbringing is also distorted. Then you will write differently, I think.
Hmm.
um my
I will
I
expand that into like memory, like reflex.
Yeah.
and I guess
Intuition.
when when we talk about like academia, i I would say there is always a pressure about presentation. No matter how intuitive or how or 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 even if you are the least intuitive composer, you always have some kind of pressure about presentation. You don't you think that if you write your music with a lot of plans, a lot of like techniques, or maybe even you have some kind of algorithm, you some people some colleagues may question that, oh, uh, is everything arbitrary? Is everything um,
Hmm.
uh, well listened in your head? But at the same time, if you are too intuitive, if nothing is well planned, you in after your presentation, when you hear questions from your colleague, you will find it very hard too. There is
Hmm.
always a
I
pressure like this.
I always felt that the intuitive nature of my work didn't fit into academia, and like it seemed like less academic because I felt like the academia did, maybe because it was so easy to talk about, like they did push a lot of and showcase a lot of pieces that were way more structured and like planned, and easier to analyze. And so I felt like, yeah, I felt like sometimes I got the attitude, like the notion that if I wrote based on my intuition, that I was, less intelligent or less good of a composer, at least in terms of the way that academia defines it. I don't know if anyone else got a feeling like that from that, or a different feeling about how the academia promoted one or the other.
I remember like you had to have an
Not as much
explanation
as
for
Buffalo.
everything. Well, but yeah,
Well,
but in
yeah,
general, like when you
yeah.
presented a piece, you had to have an explanation for every note. Why was every note there? Why was it in that register? Was it Was it material that happened before? Was it logically placed?
Yeah.
And sometimes, I guess, like art doesn't really work that way. Sometimes it doesn't work in logical ways. Sometimes it's just
Yeah.
an impulse.
I mean,
It's just
for me, a lot of times, like before a lesson or before if I was presenting in seminar or something, I actually had to go through my own music and I had to analyze it the same way I would analyze a piece that I had no relationship with, because that would help me answer some of those questions that were maybe. And I'm sure there's this because the intuition there's a lot of layers behind it. Like it's not like we're just when you're just writing intuitively, there's so many years of training and techniques and things that we've learned that kind of get fed into that intuition. And so sometimes there is really deep reasoning that why something works that's intuitive, but it's not at a conscious levels that we maybe
but
understand it in the way to
we can
explain
also,
it.
yeah, we can also kind of translate it into improvisation. Like, let's say improvisation
Mhm.
in jazz. Improvisation in jazz is very, very structured. It
Mhm.
has a framework to work with. Like, you are expected to go through, like, if you are on a chord, you will probably start from the third of the chord.
Mhm.
Improvising, or on the seventh, that's pretty common, and but it's still called improvisation. And like, most people think that that's intuition speaking through them, whereas it's got a very, you might call it like a hidden structure, an unconscious structure.
Yeah.
Intuition still, even if we call it intuition, even if we call it emotion and stuff, even if we cannot explain it, whereas as clear as something intentional, like, okay, I want to do this, so I write it. Like intuition, I believe that it still has a structure, so, but it's kind of hidden. So what do you have to do?
Mhm.
Make that hidden part, that unconscious part, conscious, so you can
Mhm.
control it. But at the same time, if you do that, then it doesn't become as interesting of a thing. Like, do you really want to know everything about your piece? Sometimes it may come to that. Like, how much in control do you want to be of your piece?
And
How much? Yeah.
sometimes if it is a little bit out of control, you can create something less predictable. I
Yes.
mean,
Mhm.
Yes. I
of
guess
course
that's what I was saying. Definitely.
we want everything to be kind of controlled because you are the one who writes it, and then maybe probably you have something that you truly intend to do. You have some idea before you start the piece, and then you want to follow it, and then maybe you write a certain kind of like a rules or you try to structure it, but somehow you may want to write something that is against all those criteria. That's very normal
Mhm.
just because when we write a piece, actually it doesn't take like a day or two. It
Mhm.
may take like a week. Actually, that's too
Like
short.
a
Maybe
week.
it may
I've
take you
never
like
written a piece in a week.
Uh,
maybe at least a month, or maybe even a few months, and then your
4
idea
years for me usually.
maybe your idea will change. Maybe your idea
Mhm.
will change. I
Depends. Uh huh.
um
Yeah.
I tried to be a novelist, and then I started a project about a dystopian about a dystopian and then I at the beginning I wanted to write about like a civil servant who help people to change their destination, because at that time
Mhm.
all the car is autopilot. You cannot drive it. You have to register your route, and then the main character is about is like doing various tasks to help people, change their route or change their destinations, whatever. And then after a few weeks, I find that this idea may be okay, but how I write this was very stupid. And then I changed the story and to include another main character. I include a journalist, let's say. I guess when we write a musical piece, a musical composition, actually our idea may change. Maybe you want the second section to be very pointillistic, let's say. But maybe after 2 minutes of your first session, you find that why don't we have just a solo line, just a solo for, let's say, the viola, my favorite instrument. Just feature my friend and then just make him play a very difficult solo for like 10 seconds. Why not? And then maybe after that you totally
And then you
forget the
keep thinking
pointillism.
on it. You keep thinking on
Well, I
it.
don't know, like
It's like, oh, this sounds way better than what my original idea was. Why did I?
you
didn't I
both
think
are
of this
probably
before?
much better at finishing pieces than me, but I've had many instances where I've had a piece where I've been like well into the piece, and then I set it aside for like many months. Sometimes to work on other projects. Sometimes it's just that composition is not really fitting into my life, and I have to figure it out. But like, it's actually kind of really interesting when I give a piece time. Like a lot of times, just doing nothing, and I bring it back because
It's like putting
oftentimes
it in the oven. or
Yeah.
something.
oftentimes I don't remember it that clearly, and a lot of times there's a lot of things about it that I'm like super confused about, and so I have to try to figure out what I was trying to think. But that process of figuring out what I was trying to think sometimes takes me different places, or just lets me look at it a different way, that I developed the piece probably in a way that I never would have if I had written it all the way through and finished it in a timely fashion, rather than, I think I might even in my my prime of like when I used to spend, in school and stuff, I probably spent 5-6 hours daily writing music, and 3 months I think is like the absolute fastest I could write a piece, I think. But I mean, I had projects even in grad school that were like Liaison was like
But it also depends.
over a 2-year project. Yeah.
Like if you rely entirely on intuition, you could probably write a piece in a week or two, right? Don't you think? If
Yeah,
you
I don't know.
because you have a okay, how do you guys
Maybe
how do you
I
guys
could-
begin? How do you begin
I
a
could,
piece?
the notation is what would prevent me from doing that.
Okay.
I think I could write a piece or two. I could probably write a piece in a week or two that I could play myself. That I would just give me enough notes to be able to play it. But if I had to fully notate it out, I don't know if I could accomplish it that fast. Mostly because like my ideas usually require kind of complicated notation.
So intuition isn't automatic. Is that what we're saying here?
Sometimes, I mean, it really depends. Like
You talked about finishing a
piece,
piece, but
too.
how do you guys start a piece? What's the do you
it depends on
begin
the
with
project.
with an idea, with a sound in your head? Okay, I have this sound in my head. I have to put it down on paper. Or does it start with an idea? Okay, I have this idea of a piece, and I want to bring it to life.
I think I can
that
start
sounds
both
like-
ways.
Yeah.
Like I can start both ways for sure. Like Liaison was the idea in like a piece, like even like my string quartet that I wrote at Buffalo. That piece I started by making a huge list of all the things I was not going to do in my quartet, and there was a lot. And I decided I don't want any silence. I don't want the bows to stop moving. I don't want there ever to be a texture that doesn't have all 4 players playing. And then I had an actual map of how, I actually had a map of how I wanted, how much bow they used, and how it basically started off with a very little bow, gradually went to the full end of the bow, and then ended with a little tiny bit of the bow. So I mean that was there was a lot of pre-structure, but then once I was ready to actually write, so there was a lot of constraints before composing, but once I wrote material, I think I wrote very intuitively within the confinements I had wrote. Now, a lot of times I do like to.
So we could see it like a game, and you plan
Yeah.
the rules of the
I
game,
mean,
and
yeah,
so
yeah.
and the game
And
itself
sometimes I
the
just have a
playing
hard
itself
time.
is more intuitive.
It's hard when you, as a composer, you could write everything, but you have to make decisions of what you're actually going to write. And so for me, like I find that sometimes overwhelming. And if I make all these constraints on myself and actually make myself into a pretty small box, then I find that typically I'm more creative. I don't always work that way. I think for the piece that I'm working on for Andrew, I started off I actually started off on writing on the piano. And I was trying to find combinations of chords that felt really awkward on the hands in succession with each other, that if they were repeated back and forth would get really clumsy. So I mean, I guess I had that idea, but I think that idea even came more with me improvising on the piano. And so I started with the material, and then I kind of developed some material, not all the material, and then I developed more. So yeah, I mean, I guess, and there are other times where like I really have no starting point, and I just like to make sound and kind of see if anything, I can find anything that excites my attention. But then usually, you know, once I find that, then I really make my constrictions small. And then I feel like I'm more creative because I push against those constrictions. I push against those walls I made in creative ways. But typically form is either intuitively. I've had pieces where I've basically written from beginning to end. I've had pieces that I've written, or maybe I've like juxtaposed material here and there within, but I've had pieces that I've basically written left to right. And I've had pieces where I just write a ton of material and then I like cut and paste things together. And but it's usually not, the form is usually not part of the idea so much. I mean, I guess with the string quartet, because I had constraints about like the amount of bow that would be used at every time, it kind of does make a form. It does make a form. I just don't know if I was thinking about it consciously as a form when I was writing it that way. Yeah.
Shunting, how do you begin a piece? Usually,
I usually begin with an idea,
yes.
but usually
What idea is it? An idea that okay, I want.
Is it like for form or material or sound?
most of the time is an extra musical idea,
Okay.
or
Extra
just
musical. Oh, okay. I
Yeah.
think you kind of mentioned that when you were mentioning your composition process, right?
sometimes this is an imaginary situation. For example, I wrote a violin solo that is about like having a lot of flies inside a jar, and the jar is made of something translucent. Or for example, when I was in Buffalo, I wrote a piece that the title was about the rain dissolves the cloud, something like that. And
So once you have that idea, does that first translate into form or does it first translate into material?
usually it's material. Usually, I think of
Mhm.
I imagine the sound. I imagine the sound.
Did
Yeah.
did David Felder talk to any of you about like he all like all the time in private lessons was always talking about like form and material being like a layered birthday cake and
No,
that
he didn't use that metaphor with me. It will have
oh he
gone
did
well
it
with
all the
something.
time and he like it was like that that the biggest part of the cake was like the whole big form and then it was like the sections and then it was like the subsections and then there was like the materials and then it was like the phrases and then it was the sounds and like he used to talk about like how you can compose like kind of going from big to small or like small to big and he used to say I really like to go from small to big which is true. I think I like to I like to make gestures and phrases before I make sections or forms.
I think yeah, I think differently from you two guys. I think from the whole picture, I try to visualize the whole and then go into the details. That's how I work right now or have been working during
So
the last few
what is
years.
the whole picture? Is it like the form or is it actually the
Yes,
whole sound?
the form is like something
Okay.
that it might expand or something that has multiple sections or
Mhm.
something that what wait a second, what was that?
And does your
Some-
pieces always does whenever you start off with this form and do they you always end
no,
up
they
with the
don't.
form that
No,
you envisioned?
no,
Okay.
because you have to contextualize every step of the way. You have to reanalyze, and also intuition is changing, as you guys mentioned before,
Mhm.
and you have to recontextualize if it works because you have a vision. You visualize something in the world
Mhm.
of ideas, in Plato's ideal world, right? And in your head, it's gonna sound awesome, but then you put it into paper, and then it might be disproportionate according to
Mhm.
your own judgment. It depends because proportions is something that uh, I don't know. I won't call them totally subjective, but they are kind of like some people like longer sections of or longer repetitions, for example, whereas
Mhm.
other people need more changes in their music. Or, for example, some people like their music to have less materials, whereas other people like more materials in their music. So yeah, it pacing and proportions, all of that is attached to taste. But in the end, like I try to visualize something right now. That's how I've been working during the last my during my last few pieces, and I think that that's why I don't remember the marimba piece that well because it's been a while since I've worked like that. And in that piece, I think I worked the other way around. I worked from the micro to the macro, just from the materials to and it
Mhm.
spread towards the form. Now that I'm kind of remembering, because
Hmm.
yeah, I kind of visualize or heard a sound and
So do
just put
you
it there.
chart out the form or is it all just in your brain?
Um, I will say that most of the times it's kind of like in my brain. It's a general idea that kind of
Mhm.
stuck with me in a way.
Mhm.
Um, except for the last piece that I'm working, but that last piece, like I have had to revise it. Not the a bigger ensemble one, let's say, but now that I have to revise it or start from scratch, it's kind of like everything that I did, even though the total form is pretty much staying the same in my head,
Mhm.
I'm kind of reinterpreting it in another way. So you can like having a vision of a form, having a layout, having an outlay, It's just a direction to go to, a
Mhm.
goal to go towards to.
Oh, for sure.
In my head, at least, it's not a set path. You can go there a million different ways, or
I mean,
to
even
a
if you're going the opposite way, like I talked with Darian Doris for my cardboard piece that I definitely started with materials on that one. Form was very, very last. But one of the biggest parts of the piece is the way that the instrument changes and manipulates. But like when I was writing that piece, I had no idea that the instrument would do that. So that wasn't a part of the piece. I really was started off being interested in fricative sounds, straight fricative sounds versus serrated sounds, and I was interested in physically indeterminate gestures. And that was actually my first piece that I was really consciously focused on physical indeterminacy. So it kind of worked out nice that like the instrument was so physically indeterminate too, but I had no idea because I would play the sounds a couple times in my apartment, and it would sound fine, and then I would write a big material, like a big section with that that's those sounds. But instead of playing the sounds like 2 or 3 times like I did in my apartment, I would write it out to be played 50 times. Well, at 50 times, now the cardboard was gonna bend and fold and rip
has to
and
go to
tear.
Walmart again.
Yeah, so it's like and I didn't realize that until I first started the first couple larger sections with Crossfires, and I basically had to either desert the piece or completely embrace it. And I completely embraced it, but it made the piece. I think it made the piece, but it also was so different than what I intended it to be because I just had no idea that it would do that, And so like, and I
So
sometimes it can be positive.
yeah, you have to course correct every step of the way.
Yeah, but like a lot of times, sometimes I think we think of that if something turns out different than we envision, that it's bad or
Mhm.
we're not good enough composers. But like, there's a lot of
No,
times
really,
that it
that's
can be a
kind of
really
like,
great thing.
yeah,
And
that's
yeah,
how we're in the end we're not making, let's say, I don't wanna, because architecture is also an art, you might say, but we're not making buildings, we're not making
but it's a
skyscrapers.
functional art. Ours is what would be considered a non-functional art,
uh yeah, I don't
according
like,
to
but in the end we're making art,
yeah,
we're making art.
yes,
Let's just put it that way. And
yep.
sometimes it's part of the journey, even if it sounds cliche and stuff, like it's what it's exciting to not know where it's leading to have that this
Mm-hmm.
sketch or this big sketch. And probably sometimes I remember, like, at times I will get halfway through and that will be the piece, and it was like, oh, but it's I didn't finish this composing out the sketch, but I finished the piece. You see what I mean? It's like we're
Mm-hmm.
uh, art is about freedom.
By
Mm-hmm.
the by the way,
Oh, you came back. I
yeah,
thought
I'm
you
back. Yeah,
okay. I thought
but
you
I
said
mean,
you
so
were like,
other people sometimes intentions or conscious comes into the piece too, because like I feel like that piece became what it is because of Bobby and Jason, the Crossfire duo, their interaction with it, and they're the ones that discovered, oh well, this instrument is tearing apart. And that became, and then I had to take that in consideration, and I had to consider the form, like if there was a sound that I wanted to that needed a clean piece of cardboard to really fully articulate, I couldn't just decide where musically do I want this to occur. It had to be at the beginning, and then I had to work with it because that instrument wasn't going to be there if it wasn't at the beginning. So it was a really different way to
very
work.
in the end it was very conceptual when you see it from afar, but when you see
Yeah,
it, the process,
but
it was
my
very practical.
process, yeah, no, it was practical, and then my process was I would say that piece was probably one of the less intuitive piece. I don't know. I mean, I think because I think the string quartet was it. I think all those pieces I was wrote in that time frame were much less intuitive than a lot of the music I'm writing now. I think actually it's interesting that when I was really young, my music was very intuitive, and then I think I got more process based, and now I'm getting more intuitive again.
Shanti, you were gonna say something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wanted to say we spend most of our time talking about how we create with intention or intuition, but have you ever tried to have you ever? Probably you have, but have you ever experienced um, intuition or intention forces you to avoid something? For example, so occasionally I remind myself I need to use some fermata because I want to make the weight or the pause to be a little more flexible for the performers, let's say. Or have you ever tried to make your music look a little more um, musical by writing certain kind of expression markings, for example?
Yes, that goes into the psychology
Mm.
of notation, and
Because
we will
we
definitely speak about that like at length at some point.
Huh.
I think because
See, I feel like
like a fermata with just a fermata is like very ambiguous. Whereas if you put a number there, like 5 seconds, then it totally changes the psychology. For example,
mhm.
I will say for the player, and it puts him in a more strict time-based numeric chronometric type of thinking, whereas a single fermata is just like, okay, this is a pause, and it's very contextual. So
Yeah, I
i
mean,
i will say
I think my notation. I'm very kind of anal in my notation, and I probably give way too more information that maybe the performers can actually um, accurately do all of it. But like, yeah, which is probably problematic. But yeah, I think I tend to really err. I think I almost go the opposite way. Like I I usually err on my scores looking very technical.
I think that that's a good question. We should think more about that, but that has to do with the
Yeah.
connection with the performers, right? About notation, about the psychology of
Oh,
it
for
all.
sure.
Like,
For sure. And
like
I
I think
find like my relationship with notation is different. Like right now, like I'm writing for a really close friend. So it's very different, and that feels very different than writing for somebody I don't really know very well, and somebody who doesn't necessarily know my music. Um, but I actually think for me, like I tend to I have to stop myself because I can be very lazy in my notation because I'm like, oh, he's gonna get this. It's gonna be fine. He's gonna understand this. But and I'm trying not to fall in that trap because I like it. I mean, even though I don't envision the piece getting picked up by multiple performers because that doesn't happen that often with my music. I'd like the opportunity liked it to be possible, and that it to be a strong enough, the notation to be strong enough to translate like that. Um,
what I also think of you, Shanting, asking that question. It's like what works for the piece of music, and sometimes intention is what works, and sometimes intuition is what works. When
Mhm.
you're stuck in a piece of music, sometimes okay, everything's going according to plan, but when you are trying to write out that sketch that I was talking about, if you compose out that sketch, then it doesn't turn out as well as you would like. And then you kind of need something from the unconscious, from the, and here I'm making the equivalency of intention to the conscious, intuition to the unconscious, like something that
Yeah.
is on the back of your head that you don't have conscious intention of showing up in your piece, but you kind of intuitively know that it should go there. By the same token, if you are kind of like going mainly with intuition and doing this
Mhm.
and improvising this and that, I think that your piece will probably benefit from some form, from some scheme, from some formal scheme, from some directionality, some something you can hold on to, because if not, it would be all aleatory and kind of like
Mhm.
you wouldn't grasp it. The audience wouldn't be able to grasp it. The players, performers wouldn't be able to grasp it. So it's kind of like a conversation there, and one that you should be aware that is always happening. You will have this default, let's say, default settings, default um, preferences that we call intuition, and you will always go back there like to pick up materials when you don't know what to do. Intention is more for like, okay, what you will say that you want. I don't want to do this that I've done in the past. I want to do something that is
Mhm.
only new for me, for my repertoire, for my portfolio, for my language, for these performers, for this set of instruments, etc., etc. That's when intention or the consciousness comes in. But then you can find yourself stuck in that, uh, let's say, trying to control everything. And when you try to control everything, it's like it doesn't quite work. So it's a conversation, it's
Mhm.
a weird balance, you might say. It's many things.
Oh
That's what
yeah.
I would say.
I always say that like you really only have the option to control music the same amount, and if you want to control one particular parameter more, then you have to kind of loosen up on another parameter, um, and not control it as much, or yeah, or it doesn't work. So like a lot of times not always in my newer music, but like a lot of the music I wrote in Buffalo, I really wanted to control timbre and um I like now I would say timbre I would say gesture for me is more maybe important, but I like timbre still too though.
Always.
So yeah, so a lot of times I feel like I have to loosen up on in a lot of pieces I've loosened up on the like pitches are a little bit more approximate sometimes, not always, but there's pieces that I've had that are more approximate, so I can control the gesture a little bit better. There's pieces I have that are a little bit less rhythmical, that are more spatial to get get that the flow of the gesture. Um, but it's like I loosening up another parameter to like be able to have more control on another, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Like for example, if the for me that would be a foreground versus background thing. Uh,
Yeah. So
for
I guess
example,
the other
if you want, sometimes you care more that the whole is projected, that the background, that the form is
yeah.
projected. whereas at other times you care more about the foreground, the textures, the timbres, the specific notes, the
Mhm.
specificity of each passing moment. So which one is it? Because you are not gonna have both as being perfect, really. Sometimes you have to
Yeah.
compromise the other one for the other to shine. I don't know how you guys
So
see it.
I
yeah. But oh yeah.
Yes,
I
Miss.
guess the collaboration with performers, I mean the actual rehearsal will change how will change how you um will change how your intention or your intuition, because you may think like this but the performer may not like that kind of writing, or maybe they do something much more
Oh
than
yes.
what you write. And i I had a piece that has some so-called higher pitches for the trombone, and then the trombonist asked me, hey, how high do you want? I said, oh, as high as possible. And then he said, oh, it can be very high. And then what about the dynamic? Oh, I want to be very loud. And then he said, no, if it is too high, there are lots of pressure too, and something like that. So what I thought was different from the reality. I thought if you blow harder, then it will be higher, but that's not the case for him. And then
Mhm.
we worked out the passage a little bit differently. And I also had quite a lot of experiences that I believed I wrote a killer piece. And then when I woke up the next day, I found what I wrote last night was horrible. I follow my intuition, of course, and then yeah, and then the next day, maybe because I slept very well, and then I thought, oh, it's horrible. Don't do this. That's silly. And and also I had an experience that I tried my best to follow the 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 the, the plan, because I participated in a course, and then the faculty composer seemed to be um, um, advocating the method that we should have a we should have a pre-formed structure, something like that. And then
Mhm.
after like a few weeks, I thought, oh, maybe my plan was horrible, so I wrote something horrible too. Then I didn't like it, and then I restarted my project.
Have you? Was this when
So
you were
how
younger?
I younger, of course, not but one of the projects I mentioned here was not too young.
And have you tried working like that again?
I I I don't want to do it again.
Okay,
how do you
bookmark you.
handle like proposals? Do you write a proposal? Like if you have to write a proposal for a piece and it gets selected, are you able to stick to that proposal, or do you just have to write something and then
um, Usually I couldn't follow my proposal.
yeah.
I
If you
I
write out the form, yeah, even if you are the most intentionality based composer, well, some
I
do,
hate writing
some
proposals.
do,
I hate
but
it.
like you have to you come up with the thing itself, the music itself, and then you see that some things it's like having an experiment. You have a hypothesis, let's say,
Hmm.
and that's the sketch. And when you go into the experiment itself, you see that some things work and some other things don't quite work, so you must always change
I mean,
things. You
I
cannot
understand
do that
proposals
quick.
from like a technical aspect, like, oh, I need electronics, or I need amplification, or this piece is, I have an idea that this piece is going to be an hour long or whatever.
But what
I
if the
understand that.
electronics don't
Okay.
fit?
Yeah,
What
yeah,
if
I
you
understand
notice
if
like
they
in the
need a
fifth?
plan for funding, or like room at a concert or something, I understand that. But beyond that, it's like if people have heard my music, they should know what kind of piece they're going to expect. And like either they want it or I don't know why any kind of proposal that I make up and that I likely won't follow all that carefully because I have a lot of intuition in my music is gonna be a deciding factor. I don't know.
Hmm. There's a lot to think about there. Always a
Yeah.
lot to think about. It's like how do you, because what we're talking about is it's not like I spoke in the metaphor of a hypothesis and stuff like that, but we're not working with science. We're working with art, and art
Mm-hmm.
is unpredictable, and it's supposed to be like that, and it's supposed to give you freedom, and it's supposed to allow you the space to ponder if something is right for 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 the piece itself, and
I mean,
from
I
in your own
studied visual
judgment.
art and painting at
Yes.
quite a high level at Northwestern. And I mean, they have a lot of the same predicaments. There are definitely visual artists that are much more intuitive, and there are definitely visual artists that everything's very, very planned out. They have 10,000 sketches. I was never like that. I had a hard time doing that. And I feel like
But
when I was
I think
forced to
that
do
that's
that, oftentimes I liked my sketch better than I liked what was supposed to be the final work because the sketch
yes.
was it had more of my interaction with it. So yeah.
But I think that it is a thing of the arts because I know
Mm-hmm.
some writers that write novels that have all of these characters uh like written out the psychology, what their intentions are throughout the room, whereas you have these other writers that just go and write. Whatever happens, happens. Like it's a predicament of all
Mm-hmm.
the arts probably. Oh, Shantin, do you
Yeah.
have something to say? Like you
Like
also
what?
write because you also write
Yeah, I try,
fiction.
try,
Fiction.
very
Do
hard.
you write just
Are you
the method
very
of which you
intuitive?
write? Is
Yeah.
it similar to your composition? Like is it also intuitive?
I usually, I mean, I haven't written a lot of fiction, and usually they are very bad, but very embarrassing to say that.
But you say this the same always. Like my
Oh
music
no.
is bad. My music is rubbish. You're just being polite. I will
um,
say.
I mean, because of my main because I lost a job earlier this year, so I started to try to write more seriously. The main reason is I usually I come up with a lot of writing ideas, very random writing ideas. So it is a little bit similar to my music composition. I begin with an idea. For
With
example,
materials.
for example, I want to write about the world of autopilot cars. For example, I want to write about how a band book is published. For example, I usually begin with this kind of random ideas, and then I try
Mm-hmm.
to plan. I try hard to plan. Okay, I I would try to think about, oh, what kind of characters, how the story will unfold, what kind of structure. I and then my intuition will start to tell me that no, don't do that. You are writing a crappy book, and then and
Yeah,
then I
that's another thing. Sometimes it's your intuition that tells you that you're writing something wrong, quote unquote wrong, or sometimes it's your intention, your conscious self that is like, okay, I wrote all of this, but I think it's a bunch of rubbish. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to know from where that 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 you that which you mentioned is very important because you know you have to also know where is it coming from. Is it coming from your intuition or is that voice coming from your intention?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that it was coming from your intuition when you write.
when I my intuition gives me the ideas, and then I try to plan, and then when I keep on writing, I know that some of my intention were not very effective, or maybe I simply follow it too robotically. For example, I wanted the story to go in this direction, and then I wrote all of my dialogues to contribute to that. However, a good fiction might not work like this.
Yeah, they might have parts that are just about character development. Yeah.
It's like trying to plan your life step by step. Everything that's going to happen from when you are born until you die. It's like it doesn't work like that.
Mhm.
It never
No.
works out like that. And you have to kind of adapt, like with every change, with every milestone you, let's say, you reach. It's like, okay, you have to ponder what's behind you and what's going to go after. It's a really
Mhm.
complex process.
So the
My
other thing I think we talked about a lot on our threads and planning this, we talked about how sometimes with intuition, it's easy. Our intuitions usually have strong preferences, and it's sometimes easy to fall into a trap where you're writing the same piece or the same kind of piece. Um, so yeah, I'm just curious, how do you guys write? How do you guys balance the two so that you're not writing the same piece over and over? Because I don't think either of you have that issue.
Chuntin, do you want to tackle that?
I mean, when I start a piece, I usually tell myself that what I have done and what I need to avoid. For example, if let's say if I have just written a piece, let's say if I have just written a piece that is full of clusters,
Mhm.
then my current project, I would say, hey, no, 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 try not to use that. I would tell myself something like that.
Ah.
I
So
have I ha-
questioning the materials.
I usually have this kind. I usually take this kind of mental notes when I work on a project. For example, so let's say I in a piece that I have a G major chord. Let's say, and then maybe next time I think, hey, don't use any tonal harmony, or maybe if there's once, maybe let's let's get like B minor 7 chord. Don't mess around with a G major chord. Maybe I don't know, but usually I take some mental notes that instructs me not to do some particular things.
Mhm.
I think
Yeah.
that that works. And you're thinking on the cells, on the building blocks, on the materials, on the foreground, let's say. But I also think I don't think like that when I'm thinking how not to repeat the same thing, the same piece over and over. What I do is ask myself, what was my intention? What, but not only my intention, what was the general impression? What was the background? What was the sound world of the previous piece? What was I trying to achieve as a general impression upon the listener that I want to do differently now? Where does this piece reside in the whole world of sounds, let's say, and where do I want this next piece to reside in that in the same spectrum of a sound world? I want it to be more violet, more purple, more green, more
Mhm.
more yellow, let's say, something like that. I sometimes think in colors. I
Okay.
mentioned this before, but yeah, let's say, do I want it to be more percussive? Do I want it to be more like a flowing river, or like a drone, a synth? Like those are very different, almost opposite expressions of sound. Like percussions attacks, sharp attacks against drony sounds. Like, okay, you can have that on the same piece, but it's always gonna have a general impression. It's always gonna have a background. I
Mhm.
From my point of view, and the background is what the listener takes in the end. It's not like well, your building blocks, of course, that's what makes the piece, and that's what construct the background. But when I talk about background, when I talk about soundware or general impression, is like what's the impression, like what, how does the listener lives that uh, time span that he was listening or she was listening to you, right?
Mhm.
So I kind of take that into
Interesting.
consideration. And
See, I
yeah,
think for me, like I very different. Like I think you both think about the actual like materials and try to make them different. I kind of think about the way I feel when I'm writing, and if I feel very comfortable in the material I'm writing, I tend to not like to feel super comfortable, um, and so I will kind of change it or put different parameters on it so I feel um, a little bit uncomfortable. I like to make myself a little bit like, and I find it's harder. It's harder and harder to do that because I'm getting, I'm very comfortable with being uncomfortable at this point in my life, in every way, I think. But yeah, so
that
I
happens when
kind
you
of,
have a track record as similar as yours.
yeah, so I really look to kind of find a space that scares me a little bit, and sit in there. Yeah, and I feel like that helps me not write the same pieces over and over, but also, and I mean, maybe it's all the same, and also it's makes me not feel bored. But maybe it's you get less bored when you're not writing the same piece over and over.
So if it scares you, you are probably on the right track for you. That's what you will
Yeah,
say. Yeah,
probably. I mean, yeah.
that's
I
very
mean,
curious. You're the first, I would say, composer that will express it on those terms of feeling, of, but not feeling. Yeah, how to articulate it even is hard for me now. Like of comfortability and non-comfortability. Like if I don't
mhm.
feel comfortable, I know I'm on the right track. Like it's such a ephemeral, like non-tangible way of describing how to get a sense of a piece. It would be really hard to explain to anybody
Mhm.
about like how it sounds. It doesn't attempt to do that because you're not talking about the materials. You're talking about how you are approaching it. It's very a very
Yeah,
similar
I mean,
thing
a
to
lot of times it does. It does. Like, I mean, I can. There's certain materials that I'm just very comfortable with working with, and I could write a piece that worked. It might not be, a piece I'd want to write, but I could write a piece that worked pretty effortlessly. But it would be, be reiterations of things I've already done,
yeah. And
because I've already done it.
I think we've talked about
Yes,
this before, and why do that really as an artist from
yeah.
an artist point of view of integrity, like, and I don't want to discredit any other artist, artisan, craftsman by doing their work here, but like I think that we kind of share an aesthetic where we don't want to repeat ourselves over and over.
Hmm.
So
So I mean, I think when
and
I get
if we find
uncomfortable, it's
ourselves
like more
doing that,
unfamiliar material. And I mean, the same thing is I think if like I think I really like really kind of smooth, very fluctuated sounds that kind of gradually come in and gradually come out. Um, to the point where I mean, I had pieces when I was younger. I was like so obsessed with it
mhm,
that I couldn't not write a I couldn't just put an articulation in a piece. It like just drove me crazy. And then I had experience. I kind of went the opposite way because I was an undergraduate, and in concerts, I would often start the piece from nothing and have a gradual crescendo. And oftentimes, whoever was recording didn't realize the piece had started till it was maybe 30 seconds in. So I had a lot of and it happened many times. Like I had pieces that I just didn't have the first 30 seconds of my piece on there. And so I think then I started being like, oh, it was so annoying. So then I wrote some pieces that I'm just like, I'm just going to do a really loud note at the beginning. So people like it stops, and then I'm going to do whatever I want. So then I did that, and then I kind of like to play with the fact, and I really have a visceral reaction, I think, to these like strong articulations. And sometimes I like to put them in my music and kind of interact with them because I do have like challenges with them as a listener sometimes, especially in a really micro level, like if I'm just listening to single, sounds. Yeah, so like I do like to play with sounds that I don't particularly care for, but part of it is because I have such specific preferences that it really limits.
But then you create a hierarchy of sounds within your own music. And
what do you mean by that?
Some sounds are more important than others. Some narrative may be more filler, you may say.
That's true, but I mean, I don't know if it necessarily has to do with the sound selection. Like sometimes I have pieces that probably the most important sounds are these really transient, like gruff. I mean, probably I would say those pieces probably rule my music more than anything else at this point.
Well,
and I'm interested into them, but I think the thing I do take of my preferences, I do like sounds that are active once they're held rather than sounds that are static. And so I do pick a lot of timbres that are like unstable and active. That I don't.
Loud is not equal to important.
Play with.
Let's just say that.
I get what you mean. Yeah.
A lot of people think that a climax must be long and loud, right? But
no,
not necessarily. But I had a question for Shantin. Shantin, are you there? You had to go. Be right back. Okay, you said you'll be right. Oh, you're putting Gabe to sleep. Okay. Is that I'll ask him later. I wanted to see if it was his intention to not make every piece sound like previous pieces, and I don't know because of it, or if it's his intuition or his aesthetic. What would you think? That,
well, he was saying that he purposely would try to avoid materials that he used a lot.
Well, he already said that. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, that's what he was saying. So I think he is trying to, and I think his music has a personality, but it doesn't. I think his pieces all sound very different too.
Yeah, I will get that from too.
Yeah, so but I feel like if I took that approach, I feel like I would maybe get maybe I wouldn't. I don't know. But in my head, I'm like, maybe I would just like rotate around, that I would get a different piece from the last piece, but maybe it would be like 2 or 3 pieces ago.
Okay. So yeah, I understand what you're getting.
But I don't think he does that. But
is that your antenna? Your antenna is different. Your antenna is really
yes. I think the
feel
way
based.
Is different.
It's feel based. It's like this feels uncomfortable. I think I should go there and try this. Like
I mean, even like I was talking about the way like I started my piece. I started because my piece actually does have probably more note. The piece I'm writing has more notes than a lot of my pieces do, and I was trying to find chords on the piano that just felt
Weird.
awkward on the hands. Yeah.
Awkward. It's awkward on the
Especially in like succession. Yeah, like awkward in their hands, like weird. They felt weird, like especially in succession with each other. So
Yeah, that would work
like for example,
for
I
a
like
tech theory class, definitely. I would guess.
Well,
Nah,
I
I'm
mean,
just
it's not
kidding.
really theoretical. I mean, it's more based on I mean, it's more based on how it's feel. I mean, a lot of times you do get like if you think about the piano, a lot of things that are awkward are things where your hands are really either too close together or too far apart. It's much more awkward to play chords that are either all black keys or all white keys than a mixture. Because our fingers are all different lengths. So naturally,
Yes.
we want to play both types of keys. So like little things like that. And then and chords in succession that require your hands to feel very different from one to another, and you can't literally connect in a physical way. So I was thinking a lot about that, like as a starting point.
This will all
I
be
mean, I
very
remember.
alien to a music theorist, I will say. Like they like
I mean,
we
that's just
talking
kind of
about
my
this.
approach. Yeah, I mean,
That's
it's
why I
such a
say
notey. Like piano
yeah.
and keyboards are so notey, so that's also hard too for me. I remember when I worked with piano on my on academic. It sounds so silly, but like my one goal for the piano is like I'm gonna play the keys. I'm gonna actually hit a note in this piece because intuitively I would gravitate towards like inside the piano things. That's more like timbral and texture. But that was a limitation for that piece. It seems like a silly limitation because for a lot of composers it'd be so obvious. But
yes.
yeah, for me it was like I'm gonna actually
At that point in
play
your
keys
life,
on the piano.
just having graduated from a PhD and having worked inside the piano for the last 10 years or so, who knows, it was
Yeah.
kind of like, yeah, revolutionary for your language, let's say. But
Yeah.
what I really liked about that piece was the movement. But that's what I always notice about your pieces, and that's why I think
Hmm.
an album only the listening experience for your pieces to do not make them justice. You have to also watch them because it's a choreography
Yeah.
uh in its whole.
I agree. I mean, I have certain pieces. I think all the pieces I would say that I have certain pieces that I think work better as just a sound source than other pieces, but I don't think any piece isn't complete by just looking at or listening to the album without looking at the video. So I always have a hard time with competitions or um, applications that want recordings. Oftentimes that's enough for me to be like, if they're only accepting recordings and they're not accepting like YouTube links or something like that, then probably it wouldn't be a good fit for what I do anyway. But yeah, it's just but it's hard because I think probably most of those things aren't a good fit. So sometimes I just put myself, I just make the best of it and I do something because doing
That's how
something
you work.
sometimes is better than nothing.
And well,
Yeah.
yeah, of course, that's how you work, and that's how your mind works. And well, we're talking about intuition and intention, but at the end we all have a subjectivity. We are all individuals, and we will, like, each and every one of us has our own intuition and our own intention that we develop throughout, but that is not replicable. That's what music. That's
Mhm.
what creating music. That's what composing is about. Like my intentionality will never be your intentionality. My intuition will never be
Mhm.
your intuition, because what are those made of? In the end, is they are both made of experiences, of our own histories, of
Mhm.
memory. Memory. I we kind of put intuition with memory together, but at the same time intention also is linked to memory, to what we learn, um, and what we have experienced in the past and what we want to experience. Like I would also add, and with this I'll close my statements, because we've gone out for 1 hour and a half
Yeah, I
already. But
know.
uh yeah, like intention looks towards the future, looks toward what's up ahead, so whereas intuition looks more backwards, I will say. uh and that would be something
Yeah,
I will
but
have to
I
figure
feel like there's a lot about intuition that's like, I don't know. At the end of the day, like I'm very interested in art because it's like an actual human making it, and I feel like like if I we look at visual art, just 'cause I think it's always easier to talk about visual art because I think it's a
yeah.
simpler, more straightforward art. Like
Yes.
I like when I can see the strokes or the actual hand. Like I can actually I can actually envision like the human making it. It's like humanistic, and I feel like a lot of those things. And I see that a lot in music coming in the fix like of the gestures. Like certain composers have gestures that are a particular way, and have certain attitudes on them that like I think kind of reflect them as a human. I think that's really fascinating, and I think a lot of that, like what makes a piece human, is the composer expressing their um, intuition.
Okay.
But it is true that it is hard to develop music forward or new material without some kind of conscious, decision making. But if a piece is all like conscious decision making, like we would get something like, integral serialism
Yes.
or something, something along that
That
nature.
sounds in the end
Which
kind of was very artificial, unless it was in the hands of Bevern, personally speaking. Yeah, but not for everyone. It might not seem that way for everyone. Like, or even Berg. I don't know. Ah, that
I
would
yeah, I
be
mean,
another
and there's like I
conversation.
think
The serial
yeah, but then if you start
composers
to get into like
conversation.
when they're serializing other aspects, like they're serializing dynamics and rhythm and articulation and like
Oh yeah, yeah.
along with the pitches, it really
Really
gets
stiff. It got really
so abstracted.
yeah, got really old really fast. But it was kind of the academic way of composing for
Oh,
like
definitely.
20 or 30 years or so. When the PhD in composition in the USA was formulated, that was the way of composing in academia for sure. 1960s, let's say.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would agree.
there's.
Um,
Uh,
but
I
it's
have.
interesting, and then like Cage made his chance music, which on a very basic, which was also a procedure. It was very mathematical, but it was mathematical on the properties of chance rather than serial properties. Um, but on a very basic level, the music sounds very similar. Um, and I think that started people to question the use of serializing like every component of music. Um, yeah,
When I
and
think about
I guess that
those pieces, when I think about Warren, when I think about Babbitt, when I think about that extreme serialism, let's say, I kind of visualize the same color. I place them on the same sound world, on the same spectrum of all the
yeah,
possibilities. Like you could do so much more with pitches, but in the end, like all of this control, all of this uh, intentionality, it kind of yielded the same impression, at least for me. That's why it
For
kind
sure.
of
I
got
mean,
old
and
pretty
I mean,
fast.
if we think about it, like, because I'm talking about, because that's the opposite extreme, and I'm saying like how, having, I feel like the intuition is where like the humanistic part of the music comes from, but we're talking here and now. We're talking post World War II music, um, and post World War II art, because of how gruesome the war was in such a multitude of ways. Most artists were really questioning, like, because arguably before World War II, art was made to create something that was beautiful. And the artists argue that World War II showed that humans are not, beautiful creatures all the time. Um, and so I think people were trying to actually remove themselves out of music, because if art was to create beauty and humans created something as brutal as World War II, that doesn't coincide. So I think a lot of
Yeah,
those types of musics were made to be not humanistic, which I think is not any of, like, we always are talking about trying to put our personalities in and trying to be ourselves and be authentic. So it's definitely a very different mindset.
yeah, we're so far behind. Like that was so long ago. I reminds
It
me
was
of
so
Paul
long, yeah.
Celan. Paul Celan kind of. I think that it was Paul Celan that wrote How to Write Poetry after the World War, the in the post-war period. Like, and I think he was
Mm-hmm.
meaning the same thing as you are right now. But that was kind a million generations ago, right? And some people
Yeah, it
found a
was.
way. So I think that some people find a
But
way,
it,
found its way.
but it's interesting, like the way that people approach trying to remove the human aspect out of music was finding different approaches to remove intention out of music.
Yes,
Um,
that
so
that's
yeah, well,
something to know.
so
Yep.
yeah, so I'm like, why? Yeah, I do see that, like, your intuition is based on what we already know, and that's kind of looking backwards. At the same time, like, that also puts our personality in music, and you can kind of hybrid the two and have our conscious put different parameters or restrictions or guidelines, whether it's not to use certain chords or that we're thinking about a sound source in a certain way, or whatever it is, that it kind of
But
allows us a new lens to put our
remember
intuition
what
on.
we said about intuition and becoming automatized. So you can end up becoming a machine or something that repeats itself over and over, mechanically speaking, through intuition too.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of need
Oh
both,
yeah,
need that left side
yeah,
and right
absolutely.
side of the brain in order to be more human, more humanistic, to a work of art that cannot be replicated by, let's say, artificial intelligence, which is the big thing right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
How not to fall there? Well, kind of be be very conscious where you are operating and of that conversation, or try to be, or open yourself up to the experience of having both coexisting within you, because that's, in my opinion, what a machine, what artificial, what AI will not be able to replicate, or some,
What
or
do you
so.
think about AI
Mm-hmm.
in our music composition?
uh, I will say that if we go through one way, I was saying that if we go too much through intuition, we will end up repeating ourselves mechanically. That's what we said before.
Yeah.
So AI can replicate that. And what's the way to stop that? Well, put some intention behind it. Have a conversation between both sides, between the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain, because that's the only way that you can escape being automatized. If you put too much
Yeah.
intentionality, you end up with total serialism, with post-war total serialism, which kind of all fell under the same umbrella of color, of sound world, etc., etc. If you put too much intention between writing music or writing any art, then you fall into mindless repetition, automatic repetition. So how do you battle that? That's what we as composers, and that's what the artists have to deal with uh, whenever
Hmm.
he's creating. Like the creative process is kind of like, well, in a certain way, it's that battle of not falling into the same. I was gonna ask you, and now that you are here, something like, uh, do you make a conscious decision of not sounding the same in every of your pieces? How would you describe that?
I would say it helps me to look for something different with a little bit more I mean a little bit more urgency, I would say, because with some limitation, actually, you have some freedom too.
That's
When you
very Stravin. You're kind of Stravin. Are you Stravinsky's grandson?
know, I hope
No,
so.
because a lot of what you say is
I
like
hope it's loyal.
echoes his thinking.
Yeah. But if you can, if we can limit ourselves a little bit, of course, not too much. If we limit ourselves in terms of, let's say, materials or form, somehow we can develop something else. We can liberate some other ideas too. So I believe try to avoid something means to focus on some other things, or try to unlock the potential of other areas of our music creation. Um, Actually, when you talk about AI, I suddenly remember an article I read years ago. Have you guys heard of a website or a company called Chessbase?
No, I
Chessbase
haven't. I haven't.
Chessbase is a company that's built a chess engine. I'm I read an article that I forgot who, maybe a computer scientist or their software developer try to um, write write a software with the help of with the help of their technology, which is a chess engine, to um, to compose a piece, and they named their software Ludwig, or apparently
Ludwig.
named after
Beethoven.
Beethoven. And then that
Hmm.
chess engine turned into a AI music program, wrote a piece in classical style, and then the company showed the piece to some musicologist. Because we could imagine a chess engine is very good at logic, calculation, and the engine follows the rules algorithm as best as possible. And then when they show the music to the musicologist believed the piece was written by second or third rated composers from the 17th or 18th century. Um, my reflection is sometimes we follows our rules, follows so-called our intentionality, try to do that, but even if we do it perfectly, it doesn't mean that we can create some of the finest compositions. We need a lot of human touch in our work actually.
And that's where we kind of forget what I was trying to say earlier this week. It's like with all that's going on in our lives, in our daily lives, we have to put up this mask, we have to fill up these responsibilities and all of that. We sometimes forget that the only place where we can truly have some freedom, where we can truly do whatever we want, where we can put our own rules or not and not follow them, or follow them completely, or whatever, or do a sketch and go through the end. It's like art. It's in composing, it's in composition, and that's where the human aspect and the beauty itself will lie. And if we forget that, then why do it at all? It's like the only place is in the act, in the creative act. And if we forget that, then we are kind
Mhm.
of like missing the point of why we began with this. uh it might sound naive even, but and pretty basic to some people, and pretty realistic, but in the end it's like, yeah, there it doesn't, I don't care how much money, how much fame, how much everything you have. The only place where you have power, complete and total control, unless of course you are being uh on hired by someone else to create a specific thing in a specific style, whatever, like the AI was, for example, is in doing your own art, is in making your own decisions and not following like that pre-structured plan, like having that conversation between the intention and the intuition so that you can create something that is human in the end, so that you may create something artistic that is
Mhm.
has some artistic merit and integrity. And that seems like very cliche speech might seem, but it's what I believe anyway. I don't
If
know.
if I have to add a few
Mhm.
things after mentioning AI, I thought of I thought of the I thought of chess, and and one of the one of the most popular use of AI is actually chess engine for whatever levels of chess players. And no matter how well the chess engines can calculate, actually we chess players, or no matter at various levels, we want to experience the game by playing it ourselves. No matter
Yes, the
we
experience.
we I guess unless you are like a scientist or like a or researcher, you just want to watch a games between chess engines. Most people would like to play the chess game themselves.
Yes,
That's the fun part. That's one thing. Second thing I would like to say is sometimes as a freelance piano teacher, I question what's the purpose of teaching kids who never aim at pursuing music as their career. And I guess one of the purposes of teaching or learning music is improving the sensitivity to aesthetics, to the beauty. We we create things that we believe that it's beautiful, or it's um manifests some kind of aesthetics in our head. This is not totally about um maths, about science, about something that is so rational.
no, yeah,
I I guess that's why we need both side of our brains, left or right.
because we're both in the end. The human isn't completely rational. Human isn't completely rational.
It,
And that's been a question that we've been
just
struggling with since at least since storytelling began. Like as old as time.
Just like our chicken
I think.
thigh. If you just want to survive, you can just put your chicken thigh into boiling water, and then after 10 minutes you can eat it. No problem. You don't need to season it at all, right?
Why season it?
You
That's
don't need
the
to you don't need to put any salt into it. You just cook it and then you can eat it. Or maybe you can skip this process too. You can skip this step and then your stomach will get used to it. Maybe I don't know, but I don't want to die young, so I will cook it. But at the same time, I prefer to have a better taste.
yes,
Yeah.
definitely. And I think, well, Megan, do you wanna add something else?
No, I agree with that. Yeah. It's just like you have to. It's like a balancing act that it's the intuition and consciousness. And I think they flow. They flow back and forth. Like our consciousness becomes intuitive at a certain point, and I think our intuitive nature can affect our conscious choice too. They're not always these polar opposites.
They are kind of complementary. Well, I think that
Mhm.
that's it. That we can leave it there, and that was a perfect way to close it. We began with a food metaphor. Halfway through, there was another food metaphor. It was it's formally round, formally complete. I think that this stream is complete. So, okay, I guess we'll see each
If,
other next. Yeah,
if any personnel from KFC is listening to our stream, please sponsor us. Thank you.
thank you. Yes, especially Shanti. He doesn't need money, just need food. Okay. Take care. Be safe.
Bye.
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 Bye.